The first time I told a millionaire to kill his daughter, I was 9 years old, barefoot, and covered in blood. I was standing in an ICU, surrounded by machines and alarms, security guards charging toward me, and I looked that man straight in the eyes and yelled, "Turn off the machines, or your little girl will die." If it were you sitting there next to your child, hooked up to tubes, and some street kid screamed that at you, would you listen, or would you have me dragged out? Yeah, that happened. My name is Samuel, and this is the story of how I went from sleeping under a bridge with one broken ball to sitting in a courtroom watching a judge sentence a millionaire's wife and a respected doctor for trying to murder a 9-year-old girl, the girl who ended up being my sister. I'm not a hero. I'm not some movie character. I was just a hungry kid who refused to look away. You know what I mean? But let me start at the beginning, because if you don't understand where I came from, none of what I did later will make sense. Back then, my whole world was the underside of a bridge. The sound of cars above me, the smell of exhaust and wet concrete, the way the cold crawled into my bones at night. That was my lullaby. My parents were gone some accident, they said. And after a few months of being passed around from one overcrowded place to another, I slipped out the back door of the last one and never went back. Nobody came looking. I learned real fast that when you're poor and small, the world keeps moving with or without you. I had 3 things to my name: the clothes on my back, a thin blanket somebody left behind, and a red ball I found in a junkyard. The ball had a rip on one side and a faded logo, but it bounced and it was mine, and when I kicked it against a wall for a few seconds, I felt like any other kid, and not like a stray dog someone forgot to put down. Most days, I drifted through the city, doing little jobs, grabbing whatever food I could, kicking that ball along sidewalks and alleyways. That's how I ended up in front of the house that changed everything. It was one of those mansions that makes you feel poor just by looking at it. Tall, white walls, iron gates, perfect trees lined up like soldiers, grass so green it looked fake. When the gate opened, I'd catch glimpses of the driveway of a shiny car rolling out, and I'd imagine what it was like inside, what it felt like to have a room you could lock and call yours. One afternoon, I was on the sidewalk across from that place, just me and my ball. I kicked it harder than usual. I don't know why. Maybe I was angry. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I wanted to see something move that wasn't a car or a pigeon. My foot connected, and the ball flew up higher than normal over the street, over the sidewalk, straight up, and over that tall white wall. Just like that, my whole world disappeared into someone else's yard. I froze. For a second, I just stared at the wall, hoping the ball would magically bounce back. But it didn't. It was quiet. Just the hum of the road behind me, and the faint whisper of wind in the trees. I walked up to the wall and put my hand on it. It was cool and smooth under my fingers. I knew that ball was just junk, something somebody else had thrown away. But it was my junk. It had been with me under that bridge, in empty lots and back alleys. Without it, things got a little too real. I looked up and saw a tree growing right near the wall, branches hanging over the top. Old habits kicked in. When you live on the streets, you get good at climbing stuff you're not supposed to climb. I glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then grabbed the lowest branch and pulled myself up. Bark pressed into my palms. My bare feet scratched as I climbed higher, the world shrinking below me. But all I could think was, "Don't lose that ball. Don't lose that ball." I shuffled out on a thick branch that stretched over the wall, my heart thudding as it swayed under my weight. The top of the wall was just in front of me. I reached out, and my fingers brushed the stone. Almost there, I whispered to myself. One awkward swing of my leg, a little push, and I was suddenly sitting on top of that rich man wall, feet dangling over the inside. I looked down, and my breath caught. The yard was like a painting green grass, so perfect it didn't look real flower beds with bright colors, arranged just so, a stone path winding through it all. And in the middle of that perfect picture, a little red ball, my ball sitting there like a drop of paint out of place. "There you are," I muttered, and for the first time that day, I smiled. I was about to drop down when I felt it, that prickling on the back of your neck, when you just know someone's watching. I turned my head toward the house, and that's when I saw her. A girl, maybe my age, maybe a little younger yet. Big brown eyes, sitting propped up in bed at a second-floor window, just staring straight at me. I froze. I knew how this went. I'd been caught in rich people's spaces before, and it always ended the same way, yelling, threats, phones out. I'm calling the cops, that whole routine. But she didn't scream. She stared at me for a second, surprise on her face. Then she did something that knocked me completely off balance. She smiled. Then she slowly lifted her hand and gave me a little wave, like I was a guest, not an intruder. I just stared back, confused. My world was rough edges and hard stairs, and here was this girl in a soft pink room with stuffed animals behind her, acting like seeing a dirty barefoot kid on her wall was normal. She glanced down at the lawn, saw my ball, then pointed to it, and then to me. Eyebrows up like she was asking, "Is that yours?" I nodded quickly. She nodded back, then made this little shooing motion with her hand like, "Go ahead, it's okay, get it." So I slid down the inside of the wall, landed on that insanely soft grass, and for a second, I just stood there, feeling it under my toes. If you've never gone from concrete and gravel to a rich guy's lawn, trust me, it messes with your brain. Then I grabbed my ball and hugged it with both arms like it was a person. I wanted to say thank you, but I didn't think she could hear me from there. So I did the only thing that came to mind. I put my hand over my heart and gave a little bow, like in some old movie I once watched through a shop window. She laughed, this quiet, surprised little laugh, and honestly, it was one of the nicest sounds I'd heard in a long time. I turned to go back to the wall, but something stopped me. She still looked so lonely up there, surrounded by toys and soft things, and a huge house, but lonely in a way I recognized deep down. So instead of climbing right back out, I walked across the grass until I was standing under her window. I cupped my hands around my mouth and called up, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't get her in trouble. "Hey, what's your name?" She blinked like nobody had asked her that in a while. "Hannah," she called back, a little out of breath just from leaning forward. "What's yours?" "Samuel," I said. There was a pause. "Hi, Samuel," she said. "Hi, Hannah," I replied, and something in my chest loosened just a little. We ended up talking for longer than I expected. She told me she was sick, some blood thing that made her tired all the time. She said the doctors told her she had to stay in bed, that her bones didn't make enough blood cells, that she got dizzy if she tried to walk too much. She told me about a time she ran in the garden before she got really sick, how her dad chased her around and pretended to be a monster, how she tripped and scraped her knee and he carried her inside like she was made of glass. I told her about the bridge, the junkyard, the way rain felt when you didn't have a roof, how I'd learned which dumpsters had food that wouldn't make me sick. I told her my parents were gone, and nobody really knew where I slept at night or cared. "You don't have a home?" she asked, and the way she said it, like it was a word from another language, kind of stung. "No," I shrugged. "Not like this." She looked back at her room, the bed, the shelves full of books and stuffed animals, and there was this weird guilt on her face. "I have a lot of toys," she said slowly, "but I don't play with them anymore. I'm always tired. And my stepmom doesn't like people coming over. My friends from school stopped visiting. She looked back at me, and for a second, we just stared at each other, two kids on opposite sides of the world, and somehow in the same place. Then she said, "Do you want to be my friend?" I wish I could tell you I answered smoothly like in a movie. I didn't. My throat felt tight. Nobody asked a kid like me that. People asked if I was stealing, if I was lost, if I belonged somewhere. Friend wasn't usually in the vocabulary. "Yeah," I said finally, voice coming out rough. "Yeah, I'd really like that." That was it. That one question. That one answer. That's where everything started. From then on, whenever I saw the big shiny car pull out of her driveway, and the black one with her stepmom leave after I'd wait a few minutes, then climb that same tree slip over the wall and cross the grass to Hannah's window ball under my arm, I'd tap lightly, and her face would appear lighting up like someone turned on a lamp inside her. We built our own little world between a window and a lawn. Some days I brought things I'd found. An old deck of playing cards, edges soft and bent. We used them to play through the window, holding them up so the other could see, laughing when one of us put down something wild. One day, I found a box of colored chalk in a park, half the sticks broken, but still bright. I brought it, and we drew whole kingdoms on the garden stones, dragons and castles, and little stick versions of us, one in a bed, one with a ball. She told me about stories her dad read to her at night, about a fairy named Moonbeam, who only appeared to kids who really believed. She told me about a trip to the beach when she was 5, how the waves had scared other kids, but she ran straight into them, while her dad yelled, "Hannah, wait!" and then laughed and ran after her. Her eyes lit up when she talked about him. You could tell he was her whole world. I told her about the city at night, about how the streetlights looked from under the bridge, about the cook at a diner who sometimes accidentally burned a burger and put it near the trash where I'd find it, about other kids I saw sometimes, but never really talked to. I didn't have much to brag about, but she listened like every little detail was interesting. We got used to each other. We got used to laughing together, to sharing things we didn't say to anyone else. For a while, it felt like time stopped in that spot between her window and my patch of grass. Then, like always, someone noticed and decided it had to end. The day it happened, everything felt normal at first. We'd been playing Uno, and she kept beating me and pretending it was luck. I swore those big brown eyes were hiding something, and every time she played a draw 4. The sun was going down, and I knew I had to go find a place to sleep. I said, "Same time tomorrow," and she smiled and nodded, that little shadow of worry on her face, like always scared one day I wouldn't come back. I crossed the lawn, climbed up onto the wall, and dropped down onto the sidewalk, right in front of a pair of shiny black heels. I looked up and met the eyes of Hannah's stepmother for the first time. Veronica. Up close, she looked like one of those women off a magazine cover. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect dress, and a look in her eyes like she was staring at something she found under her shoe. "Were you trying to jump over my fence, you filthy brat?" she snapped, voice sharp enough to cut. My brain just blanked. I clutched my ball against my chest. I wanted to say, "I'm just visiting Hannah," but I knew better. People like her didn't want to hear that their sick stepdaughter's only friend came from under a bridge. She yanked her phone out of her bag, waving it in front of my face. "Get out of here right now before I call the police," she hissed. "I'm serious. I'll call them right now. Run!" So I ran. Down the sidewalk, around the corner, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, louder than the cars. I'd been yelled at before, threatened before, but this felt different. This time it wasn't just me on the line. It felt like she'd slammed a door on Hannah, too. That night, I lay under the bridge and stared at the dark space above me, listening to trucks rumbling overhead. I kept seeing Hannah's face in the window, the way her smile always came with a little question hidden under it. "You'll come back, right?" If it were you, and you knew your only friend in the world was stuck in a room with people who didn't really care about her, and someone like Veronica told you to stay away, would you listen, or would you try again? The next day I went back. I didn't climb the tree. Not yet. I stayed across the street watching. That's when I saw the workers. A truck pulled up. Men in uniforms took out rolls of metal wire boxes with triangular warning signs. They climbed ladders along the top of the wall and started installing something shiny and thin, an electric fence. I watched them string it along the wall, test it, talk, and laugh like it was just another job. Then they packed up and left. The white wall that had only been tall yesterday now crackled with something invisible and deadly today. I waited until the street was empty. Then I walked up and reached my hand toward the top. The second my fingers touched the metal, white lightning shot up my arm. My hand flew back on its own, my legs gave out, and I dropped to my knees on the sidewalk, heart slamming against my ribs, breathing like I'd just run a marathon. I had never felt anything like it. That should have been a sign to walk away, to say, "This is too much. This is not my world." But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Hannah staring out at the yard, wondering why I'd stopped coming, thinking maybe I got bored, maybe I'd found someone better. And I know what that kind of thinking does to you, because I'd been on the other end of it too many times. Veronica thought that fence would keep everyone out. She forgot about the trees. I spent a few days just watching. I noticed that the electricity was only on the metal at the top of the wall. The big trees next to it, the ones with branches stretching high and far over the fence, those weren't wired. If someone could get high enough in one of those trees, step out on a branch over the wall, and drop down, they'd never touch the fence at all. So one night when the street was quiet and most of the windows in the big house were dark, I climbed. Not the tree near the wall, but the tallest one on the sidewalk, the one whose branches reached out like arms. I climbed until the bark scraped my arms, until the people below looked like shadows. I inched along a long branch hanging over the wall, my toes gripping my fingers, digging in the wind, trying to shove me off. Then I closed my eyes and dropped. I hit the grass, rolled, and lay there for a second, listening for alarms. Nothing. Just the faint buzz of the fence behind me and the distant hum of traffic. My hands were shaking, but I was inside again. I started toward Hannah's window, staying low, hugging the shadows, when I heard something that made me stop. Voices. Not from her room, but from a lit window downstairs, low and sharp and laughing. Curiosity tugged at me. I crept closer, keeping to the dark until I could see into the room. It was some kind of study. Big desk shelves, heavy curtains half drawn. Inside, sitting on chairs with glasses of wine, were Veronica and Dr. Johnson. Hannah's doctor, the guy I'd seen come in and out with his black bag. Always looking so serious and kind. Hand on Richard's shoulder, saying things like, "We're doing all we can." They weren't serious now. They looked almost happy. I climbed into a smaller tree near that window, found a branch with a clear view, and pressed myself against the trunk, listening. I wish I could forget what I heard next, but I can't. It's burned into my brain. They talked about Hannah like she was a problem to solve, not a little girl. They talked about Richard like he was an idiot with a fat bank account. They clinked their glasses and used words like "our money" and "when she's gone." Dr. Johnson took out a little bottle from his bag, the same kind Hannah had shown me once, and said, "These are my vitamins, but I feel worse after I take them." He called it medicine, but I heard what he really thought. He talked about how her actual disease was stable, how with the right treatment she could live for years. run, maybe even go back to school. But that wasn't part of their plan. Instead, he bragged about slowly increasing the dose of something hidden in that bottle, something that made her weaker every day. He talked about faking blood tests, changing numbers on reports, so it looked like her condition was getting worse on its own. Veronica nodded along, smiling in this cold, satisfied way that made my skin crawl. She said Richard read those reports at night and cried that he trusted his best friend more than anyone else in the world. Their plan was simple: push Hannah's body until it couldn't cope, send her into a coma, bring her to the hospital with a stack of fake test results, tell Richard there's no hope, convince him to let her go, then scoop up the insurance, the inheritance, the investments, everything, and disappear somewhere sunny. They were going to kill her slowly with a medicine spoon and a white coat. I sat in that tree, my hands clawing into the bark, my whole body shaking. And for once, it wasn't from hunger or cold. It was rage. It was fear. It was that helpless feeling when you see a train coming and the person on the tracks doesn't even know they're there. Do you think that's fair? That someone can smile in your face, call themselves a doctor, a wife, a caregiver, and secretly bet money on your death just because you're worth more to them dead than alive? They finished their drinks, clinked glasses, to wealth and freedom, turned off the lights, and left the room. I stayed in the tree watching their shadows move through the house, memorizing every word I'd heard. The bottle, the fake reports, the coma, the money. By the time I slipped back over the wall and climbed down the tree to the street, I had made a decision. I might not be important. I might not have a house or a last name anyone cared about, but I was not going to let them kill my friend without a fight. I just didn't know yet what that fight was going to look like. A few days later, I got my answer. I was across the street again when the ambulance pulled up to the mansion. No sirens, but the back doors flew open and the paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. My stomach dropped. A few minutes later, they brought Hannah out, limp and pale, her head rolling slightly, an oxygen mask over her face. Tubes already being attached, machines already turned on. Richard climbed in beside her, his face a wreck. Veronica stood in the driveway, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, playing her grieving role. They drove off and I ran. Not behind the ambulance exactly, because there's no way a scrawny kid can keep up with that. But following the general direction, cutting through alleys, I knew past dumpsters and back doors. Legs burning, lungs on fire. I got to the hospital just in time to see them rush her inside. I watched from across the street as they disappeared into bright white halls. I saw Dr. Johnson walk in the main doors, hand someone paperwork, his face all professional concern again. That night, I slept under a different bridge closer to the hospital. Except I didn't really sleep. I just lay there, listening to my heart pound, and the traffic hum going over everything I'd heard, everything they'd said. The coma wasn't an accident. It was the next step in the plan. The machines in that ICU weren't there to save her. They were there to hide what they'd done. By morning, I knew what I had to do, even though it scared me more than the electric fence, more than any angry shopkeeper I'd ever run from. I had to get inside that hospital. I had to get to her room. I had to get someone to listen. Or if they wouldn't listen, I had to do something myself. Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. I spent that morning watching the hospital just like I'd watched the mansion. People went in and out the main doors, stopping at a front desk, flashing IDs, getting little visitor stickers. Security stood near the entrance, eyes scanning the crowd. Nurses and doctors wore badges clipped to their scrubs. That way in was closed to a kid like me. But around the back, there was another entrance. A big metal door where trucks pulled up with food and boxes, people in uniforms wheeling carts inside. No visitors, no stickers. Just rushed workers trying to get their job done. Late in the morning, a truck backed up to that door. The driver hopped out, opened the back, started unloading boxes with a hospital worker. They laughed about something, complained about the loading dock, weren't paying attention to anything else. I slipped around the corner and climbed into the back of the truck, crouching behind a stack of boxes. Heart pounding so loud I was sure it echoed. I waited. The worker came and went, taking more boxes inside. Eventually, the driver closed the doors again. I was in darkness, the smell of cardboard and plastic wrapping all around me. Then the doors opened again, this time to a different space. Hospital workers wheeled carts and shuffled boxes around. Nobody looked back into the shadows where I was pressed against the wall. When they left, and the space went quiet, I jumped down. I was in some kind of storage room. Shelves full of supplies, walls lined with boxes, mop buckets in one corner. A door with a push bar stood half open. I walked to it, pushed, and found myself in a bright hallway with shiny floors. Doctors in white coats, nurses in scrubs, people in street clothes with visitor stickers, everyone moving with purpose. Nobody looked twice at a small kid walking with his head down. They probably assumed I belonged to someone. I pretended I knew where I was going and walked past signs until one caught my eye. Intensive care unit, 3rd floor. My stomach clenched. That had to be where she was. I took the stairs because I knew the elevator was a bad idea, too easy to get cornered there. On the 3rd floor, the air felt different, quieter, heavier. The lights seemed dimmer, the voices softer. I walked down the hallway, glancing through windows into rooms as I passed. Machines, bandages, tubes. Then I saw her, room 310. She looked smaller than I remembered. Swallowed up by hospital sheets. Her hair pushed back. Tubes running from her arms to bags hanging on metal poles. A ventilator hissed softly, helping her breathe. Monitors beeped a steady rhythm, like her heart was knocking on the world, saying, "I'm still here." Richard sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. His head bowed. He looked nothing like the confident man I'd seen through the gates. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red and hollow. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. He looked up, expecting a nurse or doctor. His brain did this little double-take when he saw me, a skinny boy in dirty clothes, standing barefoot in his daughter's ICU room. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" he asked, voice rough from crying, already half rising from his chair. "Please, sir," I said, my own voice shaking. "My name is Samuel. I'm Hannah's friend." He stared at me like I'd said I was from Mars. "Hannah doesn't. She's been too sick to—" "What are you talking about?" he stammered. I stepped closer. Hands raised like I was trying not to scare a wild animal. "I know you don't know me," I said quickly, "because I always came when you weren't home. I climbed the tree outside the wall, snuck into the yard. She used to sit in her bedroom window and we'd talk. We played cards through the glass. She told me stories. She told me about the beach when she was 5, how she ran into the waves and you pretended to be a sea monster. She told me about the fairy named Moonbeam from the story you read to her. She told me you always said fairies only visit the ones who really believe." His shoulders went stiff. He didn't want to believe a word I was saying, but those details, those were things not written in any medical chart. "How do you know that?" he whispered. "Because she told me, sir," I answered. "Because she was lonely, and I was lonely, and we became friends." His eyes filled up, but his hand still hovered near the call button on the wall. "I should call security," he said, more to himself than to me. "You can't be in here. This is insane." "Give me 1 minute," I blurted out. "Just 1 minute. If I'm crazy, fine, I'll go. But if I'm not, Hannah's life depends on it." He hesitated, then slowly took his hand off the button. "You have 1 minute," he said. So I did. Fast. "Your wife and Dr. Johnson are poisoning Hannah," I said. "No sugarcoating, no warm-up. They're not trying to save her. They're making her worse on purpose so you'll think it's the disease. I heard them in your house in the study. They were drinking wine and talking about how they'd take your money when she's gone. Dr. Johnson has been giving her something in that vitamin bottle. He's been faking her test results, making it look like her blood is getting worse when it's not. His face went from shocked to angry to terrified in seconds. That's ridiculous. He snapped more out of defense than conviction. Marcus is my friend. We've known each other for 20 years. He would never. And Veronica, He trailed off like even saying her name in that moment felt wrong. He said her disease is actually stable. I pushed on. He said she could live for years with the right treatment, that with normal medicine and rest, she could go back to playing, go to school again. But that doesn't work for them. They want her in a coma. They want to tell you there's no hope, so you'll sign whatever papers they put in front of you. They want you broken. Before he could answer, the door swung open behind me. Veronica walked in first. Expensive perfume hitting my nose even before her voice. Dr. Johnson was right behind her in his white coat, stethoscope around his neck, the picture of concern. The second Veronica saw me, her face twisted. "You!" she snarled. "How did you get in here?" She didn't wait for an answer. She just launched into performance mode, raising her voice, tears already forming. "Security," she screamed. "Security, there's a crazy boy in my stepdaughter's room." Dr. Johnson rushed forward, reaching for my arm like I was the threat. "Get away from my patient," he said, giving Richard a look like, "Don't worry, I'll handle this. This boy has been stalking your property. He's disturbed." Two security guards appeared in the doorway, moving fast. These guys didn't play. They grabbed my arms, one on each side, their grip firm and practiced. "Mr. Thompson, we're sorry," one of them said to Richard. "We'll remove him right away." I twisted, tried to pull away, but it was like pushing against a brick wall. "Mr. Richard, please," I yelled as they dragged me back toward the door. "They're lying. Check the medicine bottles. Look at the real tests, not the ones he brought." "I heard them, sir. They're trying to kill her. This child needs psychiatric help," Dr. Johnson said smoothly, voice full of pity. "Street kids often create elaborate fantasies. It's very sad. But we can't let him disrupt Hannah's care." The door closed behind me, and it felt like a wall dropping between us, between me and the only person who could stop this. In the hallway, the guards marched me toward the elevator. "Kid, you can't be doing this," one of them said, not unkindly. "This is a hospital. Just check the medicine." I begged, tears spilling down my face now because I was out of polite words. "That's all I'm asking. Look at what's in that bottle. If I'm wrong, I'll go quietly, I swear. But if I'm right..." They exchanged a look. But procedure is procedure, and I was just a barefoot kid causing trouble. The elevator dinged, doors sliding open. They stepped in with me between them. And in that little metal box, with the doors about to close, I realized if I left that floor by the time I figured out another way in, it might be too late. So I did the only insane thing left to do. I stomped down as hard as I could on the foot of the guard on my right and slammed my elbow backward into the ribs of the one on my left. They cursed, their grip loosening for a split second, and I used that second, twisting free and darting out of the elevator just as the doors started to close. "Hey, stop!" one of them shouted. But I was already sprinting down a side hallway, heart in my throat, lungs burning. I pushed through a door marked "Staff Only" and found a stairwell. Instead of going down and out like they'd expect, I went back up toward the ICU again. I knew I wouldn't get another chance after this. Either I'd get through, or I'd end up in handcuffs, or worse. Back in room 310 while I was running stairs like my life depended on it. Richard stood by the window staring out at nothing. Veronica sat in a chair scrolling through her phone, her face arranged in an expression of appropriate concern. Dr. Johnson wrote in Hannah's chart, calm on the outside hands, a little too tight on the pen. "Richard," Veronica said, after a moment, voice soft and patient. "You need to rest. You're exhausted. That boy got in your head, you're not thinking clearly." You're not. I'm not leaving her, he said, without turning around. At least let me get you some coffee, Dr. Johnson added, trying to sound like the voice of reason. Grief makes people vulnerable to ideas, you know that. You mean like believing a street kid over a doctor and a wife, Richard said quietly, still looking out the window. There was a pause. Richard, you don't seriously think anything he said could be true, Veronica said, a hint of steel in her tone now. He knew about the fairy story, Richard said. He knew about the beach when she was 5. He could have seen photos. She shot back a little too quickly. He could have overheard you street kids listen. They lurk around, you know how they are. He finally turned to look at her. Really? Look at her. And maybe for the first time he saw past the perfect hair and perfect eyeliner and saw the cold calculation behind her eyes. I want to see her records, he said. All of them. Every lab, every scan, every prescription. Right now. Richard, you're not a doctor, Dr. Johnson began. You won't understand the technical. Then explain them to me, Richard cut in. You're my friend, right? Explain it line by line. Show me how she went from moderate condition manageable with treatment to this with no other options. They looked at each other, that same guilty flicker passing between them. He saw it this time. If you have nothing to hide, he said, this should be easy. I don't have everything with me, Jonathan stammered. It's all in my office. We can go over it later when you've had some sleep. This is not… We'll go now, Richard said firmly. All of us. He took a step towards the door, and Veronica grabbed his arm like a drowning person clutching a rope. Richard, please, she said, the mask finally cracking. You don't understand. I did this for us. Those words hung in the air like smoke. He turned slowly. For us, he repeated. What exactly did you do for us, Veronica? She realized too late what she'd admitted. Panic flashed in her eyes, then anger, then something like indifference. She was going to die anyway, she snapped, suddenly dropping the act. If not this year, then next, or the year after. That disease was going to take her from you eventually. In the meantime, everything in this house, every cent you make, all of your time, it goes to her. When were you going to think about me, about our life, our future? She is a 9-year-old child, he said slowly, like he was trying to convince himself the world was still sane. She's my child, and you tried to kill her. She was in the way, Veronica said, voice rising. Always in the way. I just sped things up. That's not true, I said. They all turned toward the door. I was standing there, chest-heaving hair plastered to my forehead, one security guard leaning against the wall behind me and out of breath from the chase. I stepped all the way into the room, ignoring the what the hell look on the guard's face. It wasn't the disease, I said, looking right at Richard. I heard them. He said her condition was stable. He said she could live years. They were killing her so they could take your money. Dr. Johnson lunged toward the IV pole, reaching for the bag, like he could still finish what he started. I won't let you ruin everything, he growled. But Richard moved faster. Grief and anger can make a man strong. He grabbed Johnson, shoved him away from the bed. The doctor stumbling and hitting the floor. Get away from my daughter, Richard yelled. The security guard stepped in, hand on his radio, eyes darting between the man in the white coat and the kid in bare feet. Call the police, Richard said, voice steady now. Right now. Tell them we have fraud, attempted murder, all of it. And don't let either of them walk out of this building. The guard hesitated for maybe half a second, then lifted his radio and started talking. Somewhere down the hall, alarms started to change. Not medical ones. Real ones. Richard turned back to me. You were telling the truth, he said. Yes, sir. I said, my throat tight. I would never lie about her. He looked at Hannah, still lying so still, breathing now on her own. The machine still next to her. The IV line still dripping clear liquid into her arm. What do I do? He asked, almost to himself. How do I save her? You have to stop the poison, I said. At least that. That bag is not helping her, sir. It's what's killing her. He said it himself. He said once the poison stops, her body has a chance. Her real sickness isn't as bad as he told you. Turn it off. Please. If I'm wrong, he whispered. If I turn it off and she dies, that's on me. If you don't, and I'm right, she dies anyway, I said. Except then, it's on him. And her. Is that easier? If it were you in that bed, would you want someone to keep pumping you full of something that might be poison, just because some guy in a white coat said so? He closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, then opened them again. Something hard and resolved in them now. He stepped up to the IV pole, hand shaking, and closed the clamp on the tube. The drip stopped. He moved to the machines, turned them off one by one, the beeps quieting. The room felt suddenly huge and still. You fool, Dr. Johnson muttered from the floor cuffs already on his wrists, thanks to the second guard who'd run in. You just killed her. Shut up, Richard snapped. You don't get to speak about her. And then we waited. A minute passed. 2. Her chest rose and fell gently. Her heart kept beating on the monitor steady, but she didn't move. 3 minutes. 4. Nothing. 5. His shoulders sagged. What have I done? He whispered, his voice breaking. What have I done? I felt my stomach twist, my own faith slipping. What if I had misunderstood? What if the poison had already done too much? What if... I leaned over, grabbed her hand. Hannah, I said softly, my voice shaking. Hey, it's me. It's Samuel, the idiot with the junkyard ball. Your Uno opponent. Remember, you called me your best friend. I climbed trees and fences and almost got electrocuted for you. I broke into a hospital for you. Don't you dare leave me here. Now, okay, don't let them be right about you. Tears dripped off my chin onto her hand. Remember the fairy story? I whispered. Moonbeam only showed up if you really believed. Well, I believe in you, Hannah. I always have. So if you can hear me, if there's even a tiny part of you that can move, just do something. Squeeze my hand. Wink. Flick me off. I don't care. Just do something. 6 minutes. Nothing. Then, right as my heart was about to give up, her fingers twitched. Just a little, like a spark. Did you see that? I gasped. Sir, look, her hand, it moved. He was at the other side of the bed, in a second leaning in. Hannah, baby, can you hear me? He said, voice raw. Her eyelids fluttered. Once. Twice. Then they opened slow and heavy, like it took everything she had. She blinked against the light eyes, rolling unfocused at first, then slowly settling on him. Daddy, she croaked, voice hoarse, but very much alive. He laughed and sobbed at the same time, grabbing her face, kissing her cheeks, saying, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Over and over. Her gaze shifted, scanned the room, landed on me. For a second, she frowned like she was trying to figure out if I was part of the dream. Samuel, she whispered, and a tiny smile appeared. You came. Of course I came. I said, tears running down my face now, but I didn't care. I told you right friends don't abandon each other. The rest happened fast and slow at the same time. Real doctors came in. Real tests were run. Police showed up, searched Dr. Johnson's office, pulled records from his computer, found emails between him and Veronica, discussing dosage and money, like they were trading stock tips, not murdering a child. They checked the contents of the bottle, saw what was really in it. Hannah got a new doctor, Dr. Martinez, a woman with kind eyes and no taste for drama. She read the original lab work, the honest tests from the beginning, and shook her head when she saw how the numbers had magically worsened under Johnson's care. She sat with us and explained what nobody had bothered to before, that Hannah's aplastic anemia was serious, but treatable. That with real medicine, rest, and monitoring, she could live a long life, that she didn't have to spend it trapped in a bed, watching the world through glass. Veronica was arrested trying to run out of the parking garage. Dr. Johnson was escorted out in handcuffs, right past the nurses who used to greet him with respect. The news cameras loved it. Betrayal in the ICU. Doctor and stepmother plot to kill little girl. All those headlines. One day, after things calmed down a little, and Hannah could sit up without getting dizzy, Richard came into her hospital room with this look on his face, like he had something heavy in his hands, even though they were empty. "Samuel," he said, "where are your parents?" It's a simple question, but it hits different when it's asked by someone who might actually care about the answer. "They died when I was little," I said, eyes on the floor. "I've been on my own for a while." "And where do you live?" he asked. I shrugged. "Nowhere, really. Under bridges, in empty buildings. Wherever there's space, it's not so bad." He was quiet for a long second. Hannah watched his face carefully, like she already knew where this was going. "Not anymore," he said finally. I looked up. "Sir," I asked, "you're not living on the streets anymore," he said. Voice firm, like he'd already decided this, and no one could talk him out of it. "From now on, you have a home. With us. With me and Hannah, if you want it." For a second, my brain didn't compute. It was like hearing someone speak English and only catching every third word. You mean, live with you?" I asked slowly. "I mean more than that," he said, and his voice cracked just a little. "I want to adopt you, Samuel, if you'll let me. I want you to be my son." I had faced fences. Storms, fists, kicks, hunger and the cold. But nothing had prepared me for that sentence. My knees felt weak. My chest hurt in a totally new way. I tried to speak and nothing came out. Then everything came out at once. "Yes." I managed then again louder. "Yes, yes, I want that. I really, really want that." Hannah clapped her hands together, weak but excited. "I told you, Daddy," she said, grinning. "I told you he was our person. My best friend is going to be my brother." There was still a long way to go after that. Court dates, lawyers, reporters, a judge in a black robe reading out charges and sentences in a voice that echoed across the room. Veronica in a prison jumpsuit instead of designer dresses. Dr. Johnson in handcuffs instead of a white coat. His medical license gone. 25 years for her 30. For him, long stretches before they'd even be able to ask for parole. People asked me later if I felt sorry for them. The truth is complicated. I don't wish suffering on anyone. But when I looked at Hannah laughing in the garden months later, hair blowing in the wind, sun on her face alive, and then I thought about what they tried to take from her from us, I didn't feel much sympathy. 2 months after everything, I stood in front of a school building for the first time in my life, a backpack on my shoulders, new shoes on my feet, my stomach twisted into knots. Kids hurried past me, talking about homework and games, and teachers, all that stuff that never used to belong to me. Hannah stood next to me, her hair in a ponytail, a little thinner than the other kids, but with more fight in her eyes than most adults I'd met. "What if they make fun of me?" I asked quietly. "If they find out I used to live under a bridge, what if they think I'm less?" She snorted. "Then I'll tell them you saved my life when every adult around me failed," she said. "And if they still make fun of you, they can deal with me." Richard put a hand on my shoulder. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he said. "You don't have to prove anything. Just be yourself. The people who matter will see you. The rest, who cares?" School wasn't easy. I stumbled over words when I read out loud. Math felt like a foreign language some days. But every night at home, Hannah sat on my bed and sounded out words with me, patient laughing when I made up my own. Richard sat at the table and turned fractions into little piles of coins, making them make sense. Slowly, the numbers stopped swimming. The letters stopped jumping around on the page, and something else happened too. Kids at school when they eventually found out who I was. What I'd done. They didn't treat me like a freak. They treated me like a story they'd heard, a headline they'd seen, but also like a teammate, a friend. One of them came up to me at lunch one day and said, "Hey, you're the kid from the news, right? The one who helped that girl. That's cool, want to play soccer after school." And I almost laughed because for years I'd been this invisible shadow in the corner of everyone's eyes. And now someone was asking me to join a game, not because they pitied me, but because they wanted me there. I still think about that ICU sometimes. The machines, the beeping, the way my voice sounded when I yelled at a rich man to turn them off, the way his hand shook when he did. I think about how close Hannah came to becoming a framed photo on a wall instead of the girl who steals my fries at dinner now. And I think about this one thing over and over. Why did it take a homeless kid climbing trees and breaking into hospitals for anyone to question a doctor and a rich woman, when all of the signs were there the whole time? So let me ask you this, and be honest with yourself. If you were sitting in that hospital room and a kid like me crashed in and told you the people you trusted most were trying to kill your child, what would you have done? Would you have listened even a little? Or would you have called security and gone back to believing the comfortable lie? Do you think the judge's sentence was enough for people who planned a murder this slow and calculated? Or should the system hit them even harder? Especially because they used love and trust as weapons. And deeper than that, what does it say about us as a society that a white coat and a fancy dress can hide so much, while a dirty shirt and bare feet get ignored even when they're telling the truth? I don't have all the answers. I'm still figuring my own life out. But I know this much now, from the bridge to the ball to the hospital, to this moment talking to you. Sometimes the person with no power, no money, no title is the only one willing to risk everything to do what's right. So if this story shook you even a little, if it made you angry or sad or weirdly hopeful, do me a favor, hit like so more people hear it. Share it with someone who thinks their voice doesn't matter, and drop a comment down below. Tell me, if it were you in Richard's place, would you have turned off those machines, or would you have trusted the doctor? Why, and what do you think we should change, so kids like me don't have to climb fences just to be believed? And if you've ever been in a situation where nobody believed you, or where one person took a crazy risk to stand up for you, I want to hear that too. Your story matters more than you think. I'll be reading what you say.